Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Murph Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our video. Week 1 in the college football season is in the books. There were some upsets like Colorado beating TCU and the Duke Blue Devils beating the Clemson Tigers, but you also had other games like Utah beating Florida and Ohio State beating Indiana that went about like we expected. But here are the Week 2 games. They're coming right around the corner. I'm going to be previewing and predicting these games just like I did with the Week 1 games. So let's get into it. To start out on Thursday night football, no, it's not the Detroit Lions and the Kansas City Chiefs in the NFL. That's a great football game, but we've got the Murray State Racers and the Louisville Cardinals. This isn't a great football game because of the fact that the Louisville Cardinals should easily win this game. If it is a good game, it means that Louisville is struggling after their win over Georgia Tech, but I fully expect the Louisville Cardinals to win in the only college football game on Thursday night because of the return of the NFL. But then on Friday night, there's 2 games. One's an easy win. I got Indiana to probably beat the Indiana State Sycamores fairly easily. I know they struggled against Ohio State, especially on offense, but Indiana should win. But then there is a really good game here on Friday night between the Illinois Fighting Illini and the Kansas Jayhawks. Now, if this game was about 3 or 4 years ago, this probably would not be a game a lot of people were interested in because Illinois wasn't that great. They were more of a 4-8, 5-7 type team. And the Kansas Jayhawks were abysmal, usually hanging around the 1-11 to 2-10 mark. And it would still be a game that I'm sure some college football fans will be interested in because it's a Friday night game between 2 power conference teams. Even if they were both bad, people would still watch. But both of these teams are vastly improved from where they were a few years ago. And it's because of their head coaches, Brett Bielema at Illinois and Lance Leipold at Kansas. And you look at Illinois, they were really good last year, almost winning the Big Ten West and making the Big Ten championship game. They did fall a hair short of that goal, but they had a great team with Tommy DeVito at quarterback, Chase Brown at running back, and then you had Sidney Brown, Devon Witherspoon in the backfield. They had a lot of good players, but they've still got a solid core returning. They got Reggie Love at running back. He had a good game last week in Illinois' narrow win over the Toledo Rockets, 30-28. Now, I know that they barely won that game, but Toledo did win the MAC last year, so that is a bit excusable. Still a little alarming that Illinois barely won that game, but they did start their season 1-0, and they also brought in Luke Altmaier, the transfer quarterback from Ole Miss. He actually had a solid game as well. And then you talk about Isaiah Williams, their spark plug player that used to be their quarterback that now is at wide receiver, and he plays all over the field. So Illinois has some talent. Their defense is not as potent as it was last year. It just did not look like that in that game against Toledo. But again, got to give Toledo credit because they are a solid team. But I do feel like Illinois has a shot to be a bowl-eligible team for the second straight season. But this game is at Kansas, and Kansas is much improved, like I've mentioned before. Lance Leipold's done an incredible job with the program in a short amount of time. And Jalen Daniels, their star quarterback, he did not even play last week for Kansas in their win over Missouri State. Jason Bean played, but the great thing about Kansas is that Jason Bean is a really solid quarterback. He doesn't have the upside of Jalen Daniels, but Jason Bean can hold his own. He went out there and beat Texas a couple years ago in a shootout, so he is very capable. But Jalen Daniels, he missed the week 1 game for Kansas, but he should be back in this game, which will be huge for Kansas. And they got Devin Neal back at running back, Lawrence Arnold and Luke Grimm at wide receiver. Kansas has a solid football team, and their defense, despite the fact that it's not one of the better defenses in college football, they still gave up a lot of points last season. It is improved from where they were a few years ago when they were a bad football team. Now Kansas and Illinois are both very respectable football teams. This is a Friday night game, 7:30 ESPN2, so the crowd's going to be really solid for Kansas. They've gotten a lot more fans to fill up the stands since Kansas football started to win. They made a bowl last year, but they fell short in winning the game. But I do think that the Kansas Jayhawks have a great shot to win. When I was looking at this game at the beginning of the season, I initially was really heavily favoring Illinois to win by at least 10-14. But looking at both of these teams now, and granted, again, Illinois played a better opponent than Kansas did in week 1, I'm starting to shift the other way. Kansas is at home, again, at night. The crowd's going to be wild, and I don't know if Luke Altmaier and his first major start on the road for the Illinois Fighting Illini and a team that's nowhere near as good as it was last year, especially on defense, will they be able to stop Jalen Daniels if he is healthy, if he's going out there and balling out, throwing for 400 yards like he's capable of and scrambling around? I'm not sure. And even if he's not up to standards because he's not completely healthy, then Lance Leipold can just bring in Jason Bean. And again, he is a very capable quarterback as well. Their offense really solid. Their defense isn't as bad as it used to be in the past. And Illinois' offense isn't the most potent in the world. I don't know. This game could go either way for me. Again, I initially was leaning Illinois, but I actually think I'm going to go with the Kansas Jayhawks to beat the Illinois Fighting Illini 28-24. I think this is going to be one of the most underrated games of week 2 in college football. A lot of people are going to miss it if they don't pay attention to Friday Night Football, but I think that the Kansas Jayhawks are going to move to 2-0, and Illinois is barely going to fall short on the road and fall to 1-1, but it's going to be a really solid game. To move on to Saturday's games, this is another pretty good game here. Vanderbilt at Wake Forest. If Vanderbilt was just a little bit better, I actually would probably pick them to win this game because Wake Forest doesn't have Sam Hartman anymore, and that's a big loss for them. And I do think Vanderbilt's looked pretty good in their first 2 games against marginal opponents to start the season, but I'm going to go with Wake Forest to beat Vanderbilt by around 10 to 14 points. I still think that they're just a better football team than the Commodores. I got Georgia big over Ball State. The Bulldogs are starting out with some really small opponents to start the season. Have mercy on the Ball State Cardinals, Georgia Bulldogs. Then you got Ohio State over Youngstown State. This is an easy get-right game after their road win over the Indiana Hoosiers. The Buckeyes should win by a massive amount. Then Penn State over Delaware, the exact same thing. These games aren't really too much of contest. Then you got the Notre Dame Fighting Irish at the NC State Wolfpack. This is a really solid game here because the NC State Wolfpack are always tough to play in Raleigh. Dave Doran always has the Wolfpack playing well, especially at home, but they don't have Devin Leary anymore. And even though NC State has brought in Brennan Armstrong, he has not played at the same level that he's played at when he was at Virginia 2 years ago. Granted, he did help NC State beat UConn on the road, and he was practically the entire offense, but that's the issue. Since he was practically the entire offense, and Notre Dame has Sam Hartman, who's been throwing the ball very well for the Fighting Irish, is transferring from Wake Forest, and Notre Dame has 4 running backs that they can bring out on the field at any point in time and just go out there and destroy opposing defense. Notre Dame's offensive line's really solid. I just feel like NC State's going to have a hard time keeping up with that. I think this is going to be a fairly close game, but I do think Notre Dame will pull away in the 4th quarter and win by around 10 points. Then you got the Utah Utes and the Baylor Bears. This was a game I was really high on at the start of the season. I could not wait for this game because Dave Aranda, I was higher on him than almost any other coach in college football a couple years ago when Baylor went all the way to the Big 12 championship game and won. But since then, Baylor's not been the same team, and they've got a quarterback injury right now with Blake Shapen. He's not going to be out there. Baylor has a lot of uncertainties after their week 1 loss to Texas State. Granted, Texas State had TJ Finley, the transfer from Auburn, but Baylor's not looking very good. And even though Cam Rising is out for Utah still, Bryson Barnes and Nate Johnson look like they're going to take care of the quarterback position for the Utes. This is going to be a tough road game, but it's at noon, which always helps make that road environment be a little bit less tough when it's during the day versus at night. I think that Utah should win this game like Notre Dame by around 10 points. I got Kansas State over Troy fairly easily. Not going to be a blowout because Troy's solid, but Kansas State should win. Now we've got Nebraska and Colorado. Definitely got to talk about the Buffaloes after their week 1 performance against TCU. They are one of the hottest teams in college football. Now, everyone's talking about primetime Deion Sanders and his son, Shadur Sanders, and Travis Hunter and Dylan Edwards, and a plethora of other players for Colorado because they've got a whole new team, 87 new players, and it showed on that football field against the TCU Horned Frogs. The Colorado Buffaloes look like they're for real, and they look like a threat potentially in the Pac-12. But should we be pumping the brakes? Because we got to realize that TCU did lose a lot of talent from their playoff team a year ago, and Colorado is a team that has a lot of new players and a lot of opportunistic players that really wanted to win, and primetime got them ready for that game, and that is definitely commendable. But will they overlook Nebraska? Because Nebraska is a football team that has been the leader in playing close games in the last couple of years. Every time they lose, it's always a 7-point loss, a 3-point loss. It doesn't matter if it's Scott Frost, now Matt Rule, and granted, it's only a 1-game sample size, but Nebraska lost by 3 points to the Minnesota Golden Gophers on a late game field goal that Minnesota won the game on. Jeff Sims made a couple of mistakes in that game. He's the transfer quarterback from Georgia Tech. Nebraska's going to need Jeff Sims to make a lot less mistakes, but he could have a better game because Colorado's defense did give up 42 points to the TCU Horned Frogs, and grant their defense did get a couple picks on Chandler Morris, the TCU quarterback, and especially that Travis Hunter pick. That was an NFL play. That was one of the best plays of week 1. It's still going to be interesting because Colorado gave up so many points. I do feel like Nebraska is going to put up more than 10 points. And I do think that there is a chance Colorado could sleep on Nebraska because Nebraska lost their week 1 game and Colorado got that big win over TCU. I don't think Primetime's the type of guy, especially considering how he just has arose to fame as the Colorado head coach and the fact that his players maybe are on an all-time high. He's probably telling them, don't overlook Nebraska. I'm sure that he is going to hammer that message home, and he's not going to allow his team to forget that. But even if he does hammer it home, it does not mean that his players won't listen to that and they could still overlook Nebraska. It is very well possible. I'm expecting this game to be a lot closer than experts are predicting. A lot of people are picking Colorado to win this game by 21. Some I'm even seeing by 4 scores, 28 points. I think it's going to be a great game. I think Nebraska is going to show that they actually have some offense, especially against Colorado's weaker defense than the Minnesota Golden Gophers. I feel like Nebraska's defense is really solid, and they will not allow Shedeur Sanders to throw for 510 yards like he did against the TCU Horned Frogs. But I do think at the end of the day that Colorado, because they're at home, because Primetime's going to hammer that message home not to overlook Nebraska, and the fact Colorado has a lot of players that are opportunistic and they're playing with ferocity, and they do have talent on that football team. Deion did a great job bringing guys to the portal. Nebraska's got a solid team on both ends of the field. They just got to find a way to get that winning mentality, but I don't think they're going to find it yet. I'm going to go with Colorado to beat Nebraska 31-28. I think it's going to be a close game, and I don't think Colorado's going to score as many points as it did last week, and I think Nebraska's going to score more than did last week. But I do think that the Buffaloes will remain in the top 25 and move to 2-0 and keep the primetime train rolling. Then I got Army fairly easily to beat Delaware State. Purdue, Virginia Tech's another sneaky game here. Virginia Tech's a team that has not been the same since their level of play that they had under Frank Beamer. Even Justin Fuentes' era is long gone. But they did break the snide against Old Dominion last week. They beat them for the first time in 3 times. And Purdue did lose to Fresno State last week, but Fresno State is a solid Mountain West team. I think Purdue will win this game by 7 on the road. It's going to be close. Virginia Tech will put up a fight, but I think Purdue will win. I got Boston College over Holy Cross. I know they lost to Northern Illinois last week, but I do think that Northern Illinois is better than Holy Cross, and maybe Boston College might fix their issues from last week. But if Boston College loses this game, it might be the end for Jeff Hafley at Boston College. I got Virginia over James Madison. I almost went with James Madison here by 7, but I think with Virginia having the memorial in this game for their fallen players, their first home game since that deadly shooting that happened last year was a tragic event. It's so sad. It's ridiculous that stuff like that happens. And Virginia, again, is going to be honoring them in this game. I think they're going to find a way to beat their in-state rivals, James Madison Dukes, by 3, but I wouldn't be surprised if James Madison won. I got Georgia Tech over South Carolina State, Central Michigan over New Hampshire, Bowling Green over Eastern Illinois, and Clemson, I got them beating Charleston Southern. I know some people are, with that offense, they might even drop this game. No, they're going to win this game, and they're going to stay in the top 25 as long as they win by a decent amount. But Clemson definitely has a lot of work to do to fix that offense. I got Kentucky over Eastern Kentucky, BYU over Southern Utah, Michigan very easily over UNLV on CBS as well. Got a lot of these new teams on new networks, and you're getting some really lopsided games on national television. It's crazy, but I do have Michigan beating UNLV fairly easily. And here is another game I'm really looking forward to. You've got the Ole Miss Rebels and the Tulane Green Wave. This should be a fantastic game. One of the most under-the-radar games of the weekend because it's on ESPN2. And even though there are 2 top 25 teams, I will guarantee you that a lot more people are going to be watching Texas A&M Miami and Iowa State than this game right here. And this game could be the best game of the 3 because this game is at Tulane. No, it's not at Ole Miss. The Rebels are traveling to the Green Wave. And Tulane, they do not have Tajay Spears anymore. That is a massive loss. If they had Tajay Spears, I might pick Tulane to win this game. But they've still got Michael Pratt back, and they looked really good against Southern Miss last week. They weren't earth-shattering, but they did have a solid performance against Kane Wommack's South Alabama Jaguars. But Ole Miss was great against Mercer. They left no mercy against Mercer, and I do feel like that the Rebels have more talent than Tulane by far because they are an SEC team. Tulane is a group of 5, and I do think Quinshon Judkins might just tear a hole in Tulane's defense. And Zachary Franklin was great last week. Ole Miss had great quarterback play. Both quarterbacks play Jackson Dart and Spencer Sanders. And I do think that Jackson Dart will play well against Tulane's defense because Tulane's defense isn't one of the best defenses in college football. Ole Miss should be able to put up a lot of points in this game. But Ole Miss's defense, while improved, they're still going to have a tough time with Michael Pratt because he is one of the best ballers in college football that a lot of people probably still don't even know about because he plays for Tulane. Yes, a lot of people found out about him when they beat USC last year in the bowl game, but he is still an underrated gem in college football, and Tulane's just an underrated team. I do think that Tulane can give Ole Miss a big game here, and if Tulane won, I would not be surprised. This is one of those games that if you pick Tulane as your massive upset one of the week, I would not blame you at all whatsoever. But if Ole Miss did not have Quinshon Judkins, and they didn't have Jackson Dart playing as well as he did last week, and the way he looked with the maturity, granted it was against Mercer, I just feel like overall Ole Miss just has too much talent on that football field, and they are going to find a way to win at Tulane. It's going to be close, and Tulane's crowd is going to keep him in the game. Michael Pratt's going to keep him in the game. But Tyjae Spears not being at Tulane, to me, is just enough of a difference maker. Quinshon Judkins just going to run all over the yard. I got Ole Miss beating Tulane 38-31. I think this is going to be a great game, one of the best games of week 2. But I got the Ole Miss Rebels pulling out a win at a pesky Group of 5 school at Tulane. Then you got Texas A&M at Miami. A lot of people would call this the overrated bowl. A lot of people would call this we've got a lot of talent, but we never win bowl. But regardless of what you want to talk about with this game, it's going to get a lot of viewers. And A&M beat Miami last year, even though it was at home. And I know this game's at Miami, and the Hurricane did look solid against Miami, Ohio last week, and A&M looked marginally solid against New Mexico last week. I think Texas A&M is going to win this game by around 7. I feel like the Aggies have more talent, and they're going to find a way to get behind all the ills from last season. Connor Wegman looks solid, and even though Tyler Van Dyke's a really good quarterback as well, I do feel like Connor Wegman's performance in week 1 was inspiring enough, and with the talent A&M has, to go on the road and beat Miami. But if they do lose to Miami, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. Then you got Iowa State. This is going to be who can just put up more points. I know every game's like that, but this is literally like that. Iowa State beat Iowa last year 10-7. There was no offense, and granted, Iowa's got Cade McNamara. They should have a better offense this year overall, but still they weren't that pretty against Utah State. Iowa State's offense wasn't that great in week 1. Granted, it was against a really small opponent, so they did put up points. I can see Iowa State winning this game, but I do think Iowa's going to get revenge and beat Iowa State 17-14. Then you got Michigan State over Richmond fairly easily. Granted, Michigan State wasn't too impressive against Central Michigan last week, but they should win. I got Northwestern beating UTEP by about 3. I can see the Miners getting this one done, but I think the Wildcats will find a way to win, but I wouldn't be surprised if they lost. I got Syracuse over Western Michigan, Miami, Ohio over Massachusetts, UTSA over Texas State. I know UTSA lost to Houston last week and Texas State beat Baylor, but I think Texas State is going to get hung over after that mass win over Baylor and fall a bit short against the Roadrunners. I got Navy over Wagner, Northern Illinois over Southern Illinois, Toledo over Texas Southern, Arkansas big over Kent State. I got Marshall over ECU by about 7. East Carolina's not the same team as they were before, and I think they'll keep it close in this game because it is at Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium, but I do think that Marshall will pull that game out. San Jose State over Cal Poly, Wyoming over Portland State. Wyoming should be able to easily beat Portland State, even though you can say there could be a little bit of a letdown after beating Texas Tech. Portland State just isn't that good. Wyoming should win big. Washington over Tulsa by a lot. Tennessee over Austin Peay by a lot as well. South Alabama over Southeast Louisiana. North Carolina over App State. I know a lot of people think that App State can shock North Carolina, but the Tar Heels, they're not going to overlook App State. They beat them 63-61 last year. They almost had a big letdown game against the Mountaineers last year. And North Carolina, even though they did win big over South Carolina, I think that they're going to follow it up and beat the Mountaineers by at least 10 points. Their defense is much better, and that should be the difference. Oklahoma over SMU by around 17. Duke should beat Lafayette. I know that, again, another letdown game possibly for the Blue Devils, but they should beat Lafayette. Liberty over New Mexico State, West Virginia over DeKalb, UAB over Georgia Southern, Florida Atlantic over Ohio, Old Dominion over Louisiana Lafayette, Akron over Morgan State, Buffalo over Fordham, North Texas over Florida International, Pittsburgh and Cincinnati on the CW network. The first ACC game to air on the CW. Again, like I tweeted the other day, if you start seeing games on MTV, I'd really be blown away. But it's already crazy enough that we're seeing it on the CW. This is an underrated game. If Luke Fickell was at Cincinnati, I would pick the Bearcats, but they just didn't look as good in week 1 with Scott Satterfield. They weren't bad, but I think having to go to Heinz Field and the Pittsburgh Panthers, I do think that the Panthers will pull out a 7-point win over Cincinnati. And here is possibly the week 2 game of the week, you've got the Alabama Crimson Tide and the Texas Longhorns. I know a lot of people are picking Texas to possibly upset Alabama, and with good reason. They almost beat the Crimson Tide last year. Granted, it was in Austin, and that was with Bryce Young, but Texas, they still got Quinn Ewers back. He looked pretty good in week 1 against Rice, and Texas has a great wide receiver in Xavier Worthy. They've got a great offensive team, and they've got a defense that looks like it's improved, but again, it's hard to tell when you're playing against food. As Josh Pate would say, in Texas, they did not lose to food, so that's a good accomplishment for them. They can still tout the we're back for now, and if they beat Alabama, that would go into full force and full effect if Texas can win against the Alabama Crimson Tide. And it's not impossible. The line's only like Bama by 7, so it's not like that a lot of people think that Alabama is going to be massively favored here. It's not like a lot of people think Alabama is going to easily win this game, and I don't think so either, because Alabama does have a lot of quarterback questions. Jalen Milroe looked really good last week against Middle Tennessee State for Alabama, but it was Middle Tennessee State. He did put up 5 touchdowns, 2 on the ground, 3 through the air, and overall, he looked like a good quarterback, like a guy that if he does play a tougher opponent like this, that he would be ready for. But still, until we see Jalen Milroe put up those type of stats against a team like Texas, there are still going to be question marks, and they're going to get answered after this game. But Bryant-Denny Stadium at night, and I will repeat, when you're playing on the road at night, it makes a world of difference, because during the day, it is always easier to win a game on the road, even when the crowd's insane. There's just something else about a game being at night, having to travel on the road. It just makes the atmosphere more amped than before, and I think that Alabama, with their home record, the last time they lost a home game was to LSU when they had Joe Burrow, and I just don't think that the Alabama Crimson Tide are going to want to break that streak. Texas is going to play hard in this game, and Texas has the talent to win. If they can catch Jalen Milroe off guard, if their pass rush can get to him, make him make mistakes, Alabama can drop this game. But with his running ability, I think he's going to break away from a lot of the Texas pressure. And Alabama's defense looked pretty good in week 1, and they might give some pressure to Quinn Ewers. If they can get him on the ground a couple times, get him a little bit rattled, it could make Texas fall apart a bit. I think this is going to be a classic potentially. I think Texas is going to hang with Alabama. But at the end of the day, I'm going to go with Alabama to beat Texas 27-24. I think this is going to be a great game. I think Texas could win this game. And like with other games that I've said before, if Texas won, I wouldn't be too surprised. But I do think that the Alabama Crimson Tide on both sides of the ball might just be a little bit too much for the Texas Longhorns. Then I got Oregon over Texas Tech. This is a sneaky game on at the exact same time as Bama Texas, so it might not get as many viewers. Still a good game, though. Texas Tech did drop the game to Wyoming last week, and there is a shot they could bounce back and beat Oregon. I think that is very well possible, and their crowd's going to be in a frenzy as well to try to help their team get back on track with a win here. But I do think that Oregon will win this game by around 10. Should be a good game, but I do think Oregon will have a little bit too much talent for Texas Tech. I got Coastal Carolina over Jacksonville State, UConn over Georgia State, Louisiana Tech over Northwestern State, Missouri over Middle Tennessee State, Western Kentucky over Houston Christian. And the last game that I'm going to talk heavily about, and then we're going to go over the rest of these games, is the UCF Knights and the Boise State Broncos. This is a game I'm really interested in because UCF looked great against Kent State last week. John Rice Plumlee was throwing all over the yard. He was running all over the place, showing off his dual threat ability. He looked great. And then the running game was playing well. The receivers are solid. UCF has some really good receivers, underrated players, and their defense with a bunch of transfers was getting in the Kent State backfield and sacking their quarterback. UCF definitely look like a Big 12 team. They look like a team that is a Power 5 team, the way that they play versus Kent State. But Boise State got shellacked last week against the Washington Huskies. And granted, Washington's great, and Penix threw all over Boise State, and Boise State's defense isn't even that bad. I think they're going to play a lot better here. But something tells me Boise State is going to play really hard in this game to prove that the way that they played against Washington is not how they're going to be all year. And it's on the blue field, and it's at night, and Boise always has a great crowd. Boise's a team that 10, 15 years ago, they were one of the best Group of 5 teams in the country. A lot of people were looking for them to move up with the Power 5 expansion. They have not been added to a Power 5 conference yet, but if Boise State wants to join the Big 12 or some other conference in the future, they really need to up their game because they have been sliding the last few years, more of an 8-4 team, 7-5 team instead of a 10-2, 11-1 team like they were 10, 15 years ago. But this is a prime opportunity for Boise State to knock off UCF, get a big upset win here, and get back on track. And UCF high off that Kent State win and them having to travel all the way from Orlando, Florida to Boise, Idaho is a tough trip. That is a very tough trip. And a lot of people don't look at that when you have to travel all the way across the country. It's going to be interesting, the dynamic, when you see USC traveling to Rutgers. It's going to be crazy. So UCF, I don't think this is going to be an easy win for them. I think Boise State can win, and the blue field is going to make a difference. Their quarterback play wasn't that great last week against the Washington Huskies, but nothing that they did was really that great against Washington last week. But UCF is not as good as Washington. It's at home. I think Boise's going to be a lot more comfortable. And again, I think they can win this game. But UCF, John Rice Plumlee, I feel like Gus Malzahn is just going to outsmart Andy Avalos, the Boise State head coach, just by a little bit with his coaching scheme. I think he's going to keep UCF ahead by a little bit, keep the crowd at bay. And at the end of the day, I'm going with UCF to beat Boise State by around 7 points. But I do think this is one of the most underrated games of the weekend, kind of like Illinois-Kansas. It definitely should be a game people should check out if possible. But I do think UCF will barely win this game at the end of the day. Then I got Houston over Rice. Should be a solid game, but Houston should win. South Florida over Florida A&M. I got Memphis over Arkansas State. Nevada over Idaho. LSU easily over Grambling. Get a bounce-back win there. Wisconsin, Washington State. This is another good game. I feel like Washington State has the potential to knock off Wisconsin because they did beat Wisconsin in Camp Randall last year, but I almost feel like that's going to work to their detriment. Luke Fickell's in town now. Wisconsin, even though they were a little sluggish against Buffalo, still won that game fairly easily. I feel like Tanner Mordecai is going to have a bounce-back game, and their running backs are really good for Wisconsin. They ran all over the Buffaloes, and I feel like they're going to go to Pullman, Washington, pull this one out, get revenge on the Washington State Cougars. Going to be a good game, but I think Wisconsin will win by 10. I got Florida over McNeese, Maryland over Charlotte on NBC as well. Yet again, another very lopsided game on a major network. That's crazy. Minnesota over Eastern Michigan. I got Mississippi State beating Arizona. I know that Mike Leach isn't there anymore for Mississippi State. Rest in peace. And Jed Fish is trying to build up that Arizona program, and he has to an extent. But having to travel on the road to Mississippi State with those cowbells, I got the Bulldogs winning fairly easily by around 14. I got Rutgers over Temple, South Carolina over Furman, UCLA over San Diego State. This is actually a good game here because San Diego State is always a tough team to play on the road, and they've knocked off a lot of Pac-12 teams in the past. But I do feel like San Diego State has slipped a bit. They're kind of like Boise. They're not as good as they've been the last few seasons. UCLA has got good quarterback play. Dante Moore showed out against Coastal Carolina. I think UCLA will win this one by around 10. I got Air Force over Sam Houston, TCU over Nichols, UL Monroe over Lamar, New Mexico over Tennessee Tech, Utah State over Idaho State, Florida State easily over Southern Miss, Oregon State over UC Davis, Fresno State over Eastern Washington, USC over Stanford. Stanford's not going to be competitive in this game. USC's offense is too explosive, and even though their defense can give up points at times, Stanford's not the type of team to take advantage of that because their offense is not that great. I think USC should win this one by at least 4 scores. Auburn and Cal. Sneaky game here. Some people are picking the upset with Cal winning. This would be a tight game that could save Justin Wilcox's job. He needs wins, and Cal actually looked pretty good against North Texas last week, which is probably where a lot of the hype is coming from. But again, that was North Texas, but Cal did win on the road, so got to give them some credit. But Auburn has Hugh Freeze now, and the Tigers looked pretty good last week in their win. I do feel like California has the chance and the potential to knock off the Auburn Tigers. Be a massive win for the Pac-12 to knock off an SEC team, but I'm going to go with Auburn to win by 10 points. I feel like Cal has a shot, and this is a good game, especially at 10:30 at night, especially if USC is blowing out Stanford. People want to flip the channel, but I do think Auburn is going to beat Cal. I got Oklahoma State over Arizona State. Kenny Dillingham, it's in his first year, and granted, Arizona State did win last week. I think Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy has too much experience, and even though they don't have Spencer Sanders anymore, they still are probably the better football team all around. I'm going with Oklahoma State to beat Arizona State by 7, and I got Hawaii over the University of Albany, and there's no Sunday and Monday games because it's not the Labor Day weekend anymore, but that's going to wrap up the week 2 games of the college football season in 2023. A lot of good games, more sneaky games I feel than last week. Not a lot of headliners besides Texas Bam, but a lot of really solid games, like even the Auburn Cal game, just a lot of games like that are very under the radar. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about my picks, whether you think that I picked these games right, and which teams you think will win these week 2 college football games, and which teams that you think should be on upset alert, and which games you think are going to go the way that a lot of people are expecting. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I will see you next time.